The Haunting of Hollow Ridge. Episode 15, The Forgotten Altar. The group trudged deeper into the forest, their breaths visible in the cold morning air. The trees around them seemed to close in, twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the path ahead grew darker with each step. The tension was thick, no one spoke, but their minds raced with fear and questions. Each of them could feel the entity's presence growing stronger, lurking just beyond sight. Mr. Harker had given them a rough map, detailing the path to the Forgotten Altar. According to him, the ancient ritual that bound the entity to the land had taken place there centuries ago, and it was the only place where the final seal could be broken. "We're almost there," Nina whispered, clutching the map tightly in her hands. She glanced over her shoulder at the others, Tom, Daniel, Grace, and Jack, all looking equally grim but determined. They had no other choice. If they didn't end this now, the entity would continue to feed on them, dragging them deeper into its darkness until there was nothing left. As they moved through the dense woods, the temperature dropped sharply, and the light from the sun barely penetrated the thick canopy. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, faint whispers, like voices calling their names, beckoning them to stray from the path. "Stay close," Daniel said, his voice low and steady. "It's trying to lure us away." Grace shuddered. "I can feel it. It's getting stronger." Nina nodded. She could feel it too, like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. The forest was alive with the entity's presence, watching their every move, waiting for the moment to strike. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached a small clearing. At the center of it was the altar, ancient and crumbling, covered in moss and surrounded by jagged stones. It looked as though it had been abandoned for centuries, forgotten by time, but the air around it buzzed with dark energy. "This is it," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. The altar was unsettling in its simplicity. Carved from rough stone, it was stained with age, and strange symbols were etched into its surface. They had seen the same symbols in Hollow Ridge and the underground cavern where they had first confronted the entity. Nina stepped forward cautiously, feeling the moment's weight pressing down on her. This is where it began. The curse, the entity, it all started here. Daniel approached the altar, running his fingers over the symbols. "So how do we break it? What do we do?" Before Nina could answer, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. The air grew colder, and the light dimmed further, casting long shadows across the clearing. From the edges of the forest, dark tendrils began to slither toward them, slow at first, but gaining speed. "It's coming!" Tom shouted, backing away from the altar. "We need to hurry." Nina's heart raced. She knew they didn't have much time, but she wasn't sure how to undo the ritual that had bound the entity here. All she had was Mr. Harker's cryptic warning, "Break the seal, and release the light, release the light." Nina muttered to herself, her mind racing. Suddenly, it hit her, the symbols, the same ones that had glowed in the underground cavern. The entity had been afraid of the light that had erupted from the altar back then. If they could use the light again, maybe it would be enough to destroy the entity for good. "We need to activate the symbols," Nina said urgently. "It's the light. That's what the entity fears." Grace stared at the altar. "But how? How do we activate them?" Nina thought back to the cavern, remembering how they had all touched the altar together, their combined will causing the symbols to glow. "We have to do it together. Everyone put your hands on the altar. Focus on the light. Think about breaking the darkness." One by one, the group hesitated but then stepped forward, placing their hands on the cold stone surface of the altar. The moment their skin touched the ancient symbols, a faint glow began to pulse beneath their fingers. The tendrils of darkness were closing in, moving faster now, writhing and twisting like living things. The entity's presence loomed over them, its cold, malevolent energy pressing down, threatening to smother them. "Focus!" Nina shouted, her voice trembling with fear and determination. "We have to do this now." They squeezed their eyes shut, their hearts pounding as they concentrated on the light, on the hope of breaking free from the curse, from the darkness. The glowing symbols grew brighter, pulsing with energy that radiated from the altar and spread outward, pushing against the encroaching shadows. But the entity was not willing to give up so easily. A deafening roar echoed through the forest, shaking the ground beneath them. The tendrils of darkness lunged forward, wrapping around their bodies, trying to pull them away from the altar. They fought against it, struggling to keep their hands on the stone. "It's too strong," Jack shouted, his voice strained as the shadows coiled around his arms. "No," Nina screamed. "We have to keep going. Don't let go." The light from the altar flared brighter, burning away the tendrils that had wrapped around them. The entity let out a shriek, its formless shape twisting and writhing in agony as the light consumed it. The ground shook violently, and cracks appeared in the earth beneath the altar. A blinding flash of light erupted from the symbols, shooting into the sky like a beacon. The entity roared one final time, its shadowy form unraveling in the light. Piece by piece, it disintegrated, dissolving into nothingness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The forest fell silent. Nina opened her eyes slowly, her hand still resting on the altar. The others were standing beside her, shaken but alive. The dark energy that had surrounded the clearing was gone. The entity was gone. "We did it," Grace whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The altar's glow faded, and the oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long finally lifted. The air felt lighter, the forest less menacing. Nina stepped back from the altar, her legs weak with exhaustion. "It's over," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Tom let out a shaky laugh, his face pale but relieved. "We're free this time, right? No more surprises?" Nina smiled faintly. "Yeah. No more surprises." They stood there for a moment, basking in the silence, the knowledge that they had survived. The nightmare of Hollow Ridge was finally behind them. As they turned to leave the clearing, heading back toward the town, Nina couldn't help but glance back at the altar one last time. The ancient stone stood silent and still, a reminder of the darkness they had conquered, but as she looked closer, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat, a faint, barely perceptible shadow clinging to the edge of the altar, resisting the light that had driven the entity away. It flickered and pulsed as if it were trying to break free from the altar's remnants. Nina's stomach dropped. "Guys, look." The others turned back, their expressions shifting from relief to dread as they saw the shadow lingering there. "It's not over," Daniel whispered, stepping closer. Nina felt a chill run down her spine. "We thought we had broken the curse, but it looks like part of it is still here." Suddenly, the ground shook once more, and the air became thick with an overwhelming darkness. The remnants of the entity began to coalesce into a shape, growing larger and more defined. "This can't be happening!" Jack yelled, panic rising in his voice. Nina's mind raced. "We need to finish what we started. If there's a piece of it left, we have to get rid of it now, once and for all." With newfound resolve, they moved back toward the altar, forming a circle around it. The shadow twisted and writhed, pushing against the light that still lingered in the air. "Together!" Nina shouted, rallying her friends. "We have to push it back. Focus on the light and the bond we made." They joined hands, their hearts pounding in unison, and concentrated on the light, pouring all their energy and hope into it. The symbols on the altar began to glow again, pulsating with a bright radiance that pushed against the darkness. The shadow screamed a chilling sound that echoed through the forest. It expanded outward, trying to escape, but the light grew stronger, forcing it back. "Don't let it win," Grace cried, squeezing her eyes shut, tears streaming down her cheeks. The energy surged as they united their wills, their determination solidifying the light around them. With one final push, the light exploded from the altar, enveloping the shadow entirely. The air crackled with electricity, and the shadows held in fury, disintegrating into a burst of sparks that filled the clearing with blinding brightness. When the light faded, the forest stood still and silent, devoid of darkness. The altar was now nothing more than a pile of stones, and the malevolent presence that had haunted them was finally gone. Nina gasped for breath, trembling from the intensity of the moment. "Is it really over this time?" The others looked around, searching for any sign of the entity. "I think so," Tom said slowly, relief washing over him. "But we need to be careful." They turned to leave the clearing, the weight of their ordeal lifting with each step they took away from the altar. As they made their way back through the forest, the sunlight began to filter through the trees, illuminating their path. "Let's not speak of this again," Jack said, glancing back at the clearing. "Let's just forget about it." Nina nodded. "Agreed. Hollow Ridge has seen enough darkness." But as they reached the edge of the forest, Nina felt a lingering sense of unease. Something deep within her whispered that they hadn't seen the last of the shadows. The fight was over for now, but in the back of her mind, she knew that darkness had a way of returning. The scars of the past would never fully fade, and the town of Hollow Ridge would forever bear the weight of its forgotten secrets. End of episode 15.